This is The Download from Sounds Profitable, your daily source for the essential news in the business of podcasting. I'm Gavin Gaddis. Here's what you need to know for today, Thursday, July 2nd. For audio podcasts build the most trust in the creator economy, but video and clips drive the action, study finds. Net Influencer covers the new Sounds Profitable report, the Podcast Atlas, built from a Hill Insights survey of 5,061 U.S. adults. Key findings include audio podcasts leading every creator economy format on trust. 58% of listeners rate audio highest for factual accuracy. Only 31% express skepticism towards its ad claims, the lowest of any format. 77% give audio their mostly full attention or full attention. Video converts better, with 81% of viewers reporting full attention, 15% saying they make an immediate purchase after an ad versus 10% for audio, and video podcast even edging YouTube on authenticity, 50% to 45%. Clips function as the connective tissue between the two. 89% of podcast listeners watch clips on social platforms, and 81% say clips lead them to full episodes. Even as audio's own monthly reach, 36%, trails YouTube's 82%, and Facebook's 80%, Instagram's 62%, and TikTok's 50%. In a new Sounds Profitable article, Tom Webster argues the trust and attention advantage comes down to portability. 78% of dual video and audio consumers use audio during at least one hands-busy moment when video isn't an option, versus 55% for video. Quote, "The difference that matters for an advertiser is that only one of these formats travels." End quote. Next up, the creator economy didn't replace media, the audience economy did. Keyari Page, marketing and communications manager at Audio Video Creators, writes that the media industry didn't lose ground to individual creators so much as reorganize entirely around direct audience relationships. An industry shift shared by broadcasters, publishers, and independent creators alike. Durable audience relationships are now a rare resource. Formats like TikTok vertical dramas now function as early entry points into larger audience ecosystems rather than standalone products. Quote, "Creator-led business models are becoming the commerce infrastructure of modern media," end quote, and that's from Page. Next up, who really listens to podcasts? Be careful with your assumptions. A 5-market study by NumberEight that includes the United States, United Kingdom, France, Germany, and Australia as part of its Global Podcast Advertising Compass 2025 found podcast audiences split almost evenly by gender, 52% female, 48% male, and skew towards millennials, who make up 41% of the cross-market baseline, ahead of Gen X at 24%, Gen Z at 14%, Boomers and up at 12%, and Gen Alpha with 9%. The report also found real market-by-market variation, with the 35 to 45 bracket remaining a major segment in France and the UK, and 65-plus listeners over-indexing in the United States, undercutting the assumption that podcast audiences skew uniformly young or male. Category preferences shift by age too, from sports among teens to comedy for 18 to 34s to true crime for 55 to 64s. The report says podcast planning should be based on podcast native benchmarks, not assumptions drawn from wider media consumption. Next up, Paul Riismandel on audience growth impact. In discussing a recent Ashley Carman newsletter, Hill Insights president Paul Riismandel highlights a stat from a recent podcast download webinar. Weekly podcast consumers in the United States have grown 45% since 2022, adding an estimated 56 million new listeners in 4 years. He notes the industry still churns roughly 12% of a given year's listeners annually, meaning the underlying rate of new listener acquisition is even higher than the net figure suggests. He ties this to Apple Podcasts' declining share of most used app, arguing YouTube and Spotify pull in new listeners because they're general media apps that expose audiences to podcasts incidentally, while Apple Podcasts only reaches people who are looking for podcasts specifically. He points to Spotify's roughly 2-year climb past Apple after adding a dedicated podcast tab as a reference point for how long Apple's new HLS video push might take to move the needle. As for the rest of the news, Libsyn has named Elsie Bergerson Senior Director of Business Development. Headliner now lets podcasters add and edit captions on audiograms directly in its mobile app, removing a step from the clip creation workflow. Backyard Ventures became the exclusive advertising representative for Grown and Growing, a podcast from Kian and Shawnee Henderson, a deal that extends to the YouTube and socials for a couple with 3.5 million plus Instagram followers. PRX unveiled a slate of podcast series and specials marking the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence in partnership with the Smithsonian, Radiotopia, More Perfect, and the National Constitution Center. OSHA has relaunched its free AI-powered podcast name generator, adding SEO-optimized titles, relevant scoring, and keyword suggestions to help new creators name and position a show before launch. Nielsen and the Media Rating Council paused accreditation of Nielsen's audio diary measurement service for 6 months, running from June 23rd to December 23rd of this year, as Nielsen tests digital tools meant to improve response rates and demographic accuracy. And finally, this one's really handy for the journalists out there, PodX's Matt Sayward launched getpodcast.art, a free tool that lets users search the show they want art of by name to be able to quickly and easily pull high-resolution versions of the cover art for pitch decks, award submissions, graphics, etc. And to add a personal anecdote as a podcast journalist, this is an incredibly useful tool, and I say that as somebody who has wanted to fist fight or image searches multiple times in the past, trying to find a high-res version of a podcast artwork. That'll do it for today's episode of The Download. You can find links to everything I just talked about by clicking the link in your show notes that takes you to today's episode post on soundsprofitable.com, where you can also subscribe to get the newsletter version sent to your inbox every day. Today's issue was written and produced by myself, Tom Webster, Molly DeMillier, and Brian Barletta. For Sounds Profitable, I'm Gavin Gaddis, and I'll see you tomorrow morning for the Download Recap.